Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Fencing Flops. This week we're going to be taking a look at the fencing scene from the show The Big Bang Theory, from the episode The Perspiration Implementation. So I just want to stop right there for a second to point out something. So far, this very beginning scene is laid out pretty well. You can see here that all four of them have obviously never fenced before, and they're sort of, they're holding their blades and kind of waving them around, kind of investigating them, and that's behavior typical of beginners. But the other thing that they really got right is the amount of gear that they're wearing. They're wearing what is required in order to practice, which is the underarm protector, the jacket, the glove, and they're not wearing them, but they haven't started yet, but they also have their masks. That is the minimum that is required to engage another fencer. If you want to compete, you have to wear a few other pieces of equipment, but in order to just, face off against someone in terms of just practice, then that's all you need. So, because of that, and for a few other reasons, clubs provide equipment for beginners to get started before they get to the point where they want to actually invest, money into this. So, it's very common for a whole group of beginners to be wearing regular pants, just whatever they wore into class that day, and then the top half of their body is actually suited up. So, I know it's a small thing, but it's nice to see how it actually looks like a class that doesn't know how to fence that is ready to learn. Because every now and then you get shows where you have people who supposedly don't know how to fence, and they're either wearing wrong equipment or wearing all the equipment that beginners wouldn't be wearing. They managed to get the balance just right. If I really had to nitpick, I would say that most beginners, at least in foil, also have French grips, which look like this, and they're all using pistol grips, which look like this. Generally speaking, beginners start on French grips and then move on to pistol grips. Most of the time they don't start on pistol grips, although I have heard of some fencers who do. But again, that's just me being nitpicky. It doesn't really matter too much.
Gentlemen, welcome to the Fencing Club. Before we start, I just want to warn you, fencing isn't a joke. I hope you're not here because you think it's going to be like Star Wars. That's not why we're here.
Yeah, I'm here because I think it's going to be like Game of Thrones. Maybe a little Princess Bride.
Well, sorry to disappoint you, but fencing is a serious sport. If you're not willing to put in the effort, you might as well just leave now.
We're not afraid of physical activity.
Yeah. All right. Let's begin with some fundamentals. This is the en garde position. Feet are in an L, heels in a straight line, elbows about a fist from the rib cage. Notice my dominant leg faces forward. Okay, show me en garde. Good. Knees bent, slightly over the toe, non-sword hand up for balance.
Oh, God, I am going to feel this tomorrow.
Okay, the first move is called an advance. You move your front foot forward, heel to toe, back foot follows. So, front foot forward, heel to toe, back foot follows. Now you try. Advance. And advance. And advance. This is easy. I didn't need to wear a cup. Good. This next move is called a retreat. Step back. Back foot first, toe to heel, front foot follows. On 3.
Excuse me, Barry.
Yes.
When can I stab one of my friends?
In fencing, we don't call it a stab, we call it a touch.
Yes, I'm aware, but if I say I want to touch one of my friends, I'll get called into human resources.
So, let's break down that scene a little bit. Pretty much most of what they said is pretty accurate. The thing that wasn't accurate was the amount of information. Now, they probably went with that simply because they didn't want to overwhelm the audience too much. But in a sense, that sort of lack of information can also be realistic, because a lot of times coaches are afraid that they'll have the same problem with new students, especially if this is their very first class. Usually, I can't speak for every coach, but usually the way that I've run lessons and the way that I've seen a lot of other coaches run lessons is they'll typically spend the first lesson or two on literally one or two stances. They'll keep it very minimal and then go a little more in depth about each of them. In this case, especially since later on it looks like they're actually going to be fencing, it looks like he's spending less time explaining each one and like going over the details of it, and more time just fitting in more, forms and movements. So he's going for sort of a quantity versus quality sort of thing. The thing is, though, this is so early on that, I mean, students can respond any way to it, and you would have no way of knowing until much further down the road. So, there's technically nothing really wrong with it. It's just not exactly how it would do things. Although everything that they mentioned is correct. It is a little bit difficult to tell how good it would actually turn out, though, because this is scripted. They've, I don't know how much rehearsal goes into these sort of things, but there was some rehearsal. And so they already know what they should be doing because this isn't their first time around. So it's hard to tell if that actually would have been enough information for a beginner to pick it up right away. It might have been enough for some people, but it probably wasn't quite enough for everyone. The main thing, though, is not much happens, so there's not really a whole lot to look into. So let's keep going.
Koopa and Kuthwapowie advance. The other two would tweet. 1, 2, 3. Very good. Switch it up. 1, 2, 3. Switch again. 1, 2, 3. Excuse me. No, I'm teaching a class. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that happens. Maybe not to that degree, but coaches usually have to keep a pretty close eye on their students just to make sure that, they don't get out of control. Because a lot of students come in because they saw a movie or TV show with fencing in it for a long time. I remember when I started, it was Pirates of the Caribbean that drew in a lot of people. But, even though what they're holding isn't, probably the image of a sword that they had in their head, it's still very close to one. So every now and then you'll get some class clown who doesn't really have a regard for common sense and safety and starts waving his blade around if for some reason the coach gets distracted.
Kick your front leg up and push off with your back leg. Now you try. And again. And again.
Look at us, we're like the Rockettes.
On guard, Leonard. Prepare yourself for a rigorous touching.
My name is Amigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. I thought you were Puss in Boots. Oh, yeah, right, sorry. My name is Puss in Boots. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
That's also pretty realistic. I've seen a fair number of students come in who, on their breaks or whatever, will sometimes start posing or will start doing choreographed movements with someone else in the class just so that they can have some of that, sword fighting mojo feeling. And, there's nothing wrong with it. It's them just messing around, having fun. I just wanted to point it out because it may seem like just part of a sitcom, but it's actually in line with a lot of people that I've seen. It might not be so common that it happens in every single class, but it happens enough that I think most experienced fencers have run into people who do this.
This is fun.
Good. It's nice to see your mind off Amy. What's going on with Amy?
Not that it's any of your business, but she broke up with me.
Really? Good to know.
Good to know.
What's that supposed to mean?
So, this is the point where we sort of see some fencing and not people just messing around. Although it's not really any sort of competitive fencing, it's just, they're doing a drill. And I don't know what drill they are doing, so I can't really say how accurate it is. However, from what I saw, it looks like a drill that isn't really useful for much. It looks like, let me see again. So it looks like one person moves forward with a double or triple advance, and as the other person is retreating, they do a beat on either side. This is their first lesson, but there's really no reason for that. And the thing is, even if a drill doesn't look like it'll directly correlate to fencing, there is usually some aspect of fencing that you need to get used to that the drill it looks odd because it takes that single aspect and magnifies it. So sometimes the drill itself is something that you would never do in an actual bout, but it has been constructed in a way so that you focus on this particular aspect and then you have that aspect in mind, so it now becomes sort of muscle memory. So you take that single part of the drill and that's what you apply to your fencing. So sometimes drills don't look like something that you should be practicing, but this one in particular, I don't really see a purpose for it. I think they just kind of picked a couple random movements and went with it. Yeah, this drill doesn't look like something you would ever find. There's no reason to do a beat when you're going back, so there's no reason to have a drill that might reinforce that. But so far, that's the only thing that I can find wrong with this scene. The thing is, I could start nitpicking about their form, which is awful, but the thing is, as part of the show, they are beginners. So in this case, their lack of experience is actually more in line with what they're supposed to be doing. They're not actors who are beginners at fencing who are trying to be shown as advanced fencers. They're beginner fencers who are being shown as beginner fencers. So even though their form is very bad, it's very close. That actually makes it more realistic. So I can't really critique them on that. So in this episode, there are a few other scenes where they're walking around and talking while in fencing gear. I'm not really gonna look at those though, because this is basically the end of the fencing part. So this was actually a good representation of how a lot of beginner classes go. There wasn't a whole lot of fencing in there, and I know that there are some beginner classes where for at least the very first lesson, a few places they don't even let the students, pick up a blade. That's the club's choice, and no one can really say that it's a wrong one. There are actually probably quite a few clubs, I know that my club wouldn't have done this, where they actually, suit them up to the point that they can actually face each other on lesson number one. But I have seen a few clubs that do it. It is kind of jumping the gun. Realistically, they would have had at least a couple more footwork lessons and just lessons where you're holding the blade and you're doing movements, but you're not actually facing anyone. So you're probably just doing it in whatever clothes you wore to the club that day. But at least for a lesson that's early enough that, like, maybe if this was the lesson where they finally had, one or two lessons before this, and so they got to the point where they can put on their gear, this is very realistic according to how that lesson would have looked and how it would have gone. They're doing some structure, they're going over very basic movements. A lot of their form is bad, but in a way that is realistic of fencers at their level. So this was actually a very good scene. A few things were over dramatized, but that's just because it's a comedy show. It's a sitcom. So for their score, I'm going to say how realistic it was according to how a class would have gone, not necessarily how their fencing was. Because they didn't really fence each other, the most they did was a drill. But in terms of how accurate this portrayal of a beginner class was, I would actually give this a 10 out of 10. I didn't really see anything wrong with it. Yeah, they did pretty well. Although, they kind of did well because they avoided a lot of things that I feel they would have tripped themselves on. So, it's almost like they're accurate out of omission. But that's the end of that, and I'll see you next week.